Welcome to the Enter the Mind podcast.
The most real talk, no nonsense podcast on the empowering of the mind.
Why enter the mind? Because it's that room in your house that's been there all along that you've never gone into.
Well, now it's time to enter with two mind coaches dedicated to self-help and the thriving of all human beings.
I'm Kyra Carlin.
And I'm Robert Nelson.
Welcome to Enter the Mind.
In today's episode, we're going to be talking about living a life true to yourself. Before we get into that, Kyra, how's it going today?
Going good. We got some torrential downpour over here in Florida, Hollywood. But other than that, I'm doing super good. Had a protein breakfast, so I'm lit. How are you?
Awesome. I'm having some protein breakfast here as well. It's 8 a.m. here on the West Coast. And yeah, ready to discuss this important topic before I head into work. So the topic today was inspired by a book that I read called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And it's a book written by a nurse who traveled, I think it was throughout Australia, kind of spending or helping people during the last couple months of their lives. So she would go to a house, live there, and be like the caregiver for, an elderly person who was on their deathbed. And she would do this, just go from house to house to house, spending a couple weeks or months at each house. That allowed her to gather lots of feedback, because as she would talk to her patients, she would kind of listen in on, their last final reflections on life. So I think it's a cool opportunity to really gather a lot of data, a lot of information about this critical moment in the human being's life. So she wrote this book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And one of the top 5 regrets, if I believe it's the top regret, but you can find these on, I'll put a link in the description, in the show description. But one of the top 5 regrets is that I wish I had lived a life true to myself, not the life others wanted me to live. And I thought that was very powerful. I have a lot to say on that, but I'll pass it to you to see if you have any immediate reactions to that.
Well, I definitely feel like that's one of like the top regrets. Like, I feel like sometimes I hear, some people like wish they would have spent more time with their family, but like personally, like I truthfully believe, as in the book that you read, that really it comes down to living the life that you wanted to live instead of being pressured and sort of guided falsely by like society and like everyone around you. And sometimes I remember I was talking to a potential client, and she was saying that she's easily peer pressured, sort of like easily led by those who are closest to her. So like if those closest to you during your life are sort of pushing you to do something that like that's not really true to yourself, that's going to penetrate you deeper than society ever will. So, it's kind of sucky, because we're so influenced by those who are closest to us. And, if they're pushing us harder, if they're not pushing us hard enough, or if they're sort of deciding our lives for us, then yes, it's totally possible to be on your deathbed and be like, fuck, man, like, fuck. Why didn't I do what I wanted to do? Why couldn't I realize this when I was growing up? Why this and why that? So do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah. So that's a good example of, having a peer group and having that, being kind of like distracted by your peer group or misled, I guess. And I've always been into this concept of of scaling or like telescoping in the sense of you can observe something at a very big level, and you can observe the same pattern at a very small level. So for example, what's an example? So like, you remember like biology class, you have a cell, and then there's all of these little organelles inside of the cell that help this, they work together to make the cell stay alive. Well, those cells make up a human body, and the human body has its own organs that work together to keep the whole body alive. So it's like the same concept, but at this bigger scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same thing, you can look at a leaf and then see like the patterns of the branches or whatever. Then you look at the tree, and the branches of the tree actually branch out the same way that a leaf branches out. So it's this kind of like my friend used to use this term fractal. It's like it just kind of gets smaller and smaller and smaller, or bigger and bigger and bigger. So the idea that I had was, from your example, was that in the large scale, someone could, even go down the wrong career path, for instance, because their friends or their peer group influenced them. And that's a very big macro level deviation. But then at a very small level, you could take a trip to the mall with your friends, and the original purpose of the trip was for you to buy whatever protein powder, and your friends distracted you during the trip because they wanted to go see something else. They wanted to go to the cosmetics store, and you guys, all the time ran out, and you didn't get what you wanted to get. So that's sort of like a small, like a microscopic example, and it can telescope all of the way into a large, big picture example of like, you married the wrong person, or you took a career, or you moved to, you always wanted to move out of your city and you never moved out of your city. That's these very big, high level regrets. And to me, that's like, I don't know, it's sort of scary. It's like, I don't want to have some sort of like big regret like that at the end of my life and say, oh, wow, I lost my path. Like, oh, I just worked a job because to put food on the table, when really I wasn't following my passion. And of course, there's a lot more to that. I mean, you do have to pay the bills, but you get the point. It's like something at that level, at such a big level, it's to me, that carries a lot of weight, and I want to do everything I can to avoid falling into that.
Completely agree. That was so well said. I love the way you speak. It gets me. So what hit me was really like the words, like not getting what you want, almost as if like you're settling, almost as if like you feel maybe you're not important enough, or what you want isn't important enough, as in like the trip to the mall. Like, you went for protein powder, but you didn't get the time. But I think that also it comes down to, is the protein powder that important to you? And I think that right there, that major decision needs to be made. Otherwise, you're going to go through a life with like unfinished business per se, because you never took the time to understand if that protein powder was important to you enough or wasn't important to you. So like, if it was really, really, really important to you and you didn't get to do it, you're probably going to feel a little shitty and be like, damn, like, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I tell my friends that this protein powder was really important to me? Why didn't I stand up for myself? Why didn't I get that thing that I wanted? Why did I settle? Right? But if it wasn't that important to you, that initial decision, if it wasn't that important to you, then you can, sail through life easily, and you can be like, well, it truthfully wasn't that important to me. I don't mind going another day to the mall alone. So I think that it also comes down to what truthfully has extreme meaning, purpose, and, importance to you in your life. Because as you go through life, I saw this post, and it's been sticking with me so freaking much. And it was like, my friends are always telling me that I'll never get a husband because I have too high of standards or something like that. Like, you need to like find a husband or something. And the post said like, and I replied back, and you're going to wind up divorced because you settle. And that really freaking hit me, because I feel like people these days, they're rushing into full-time jobs, and I mean full-time job as in like a telephone answerer, or like a salesperson, or like, I don't know, something that they're not truly passionate about, something that they're kind of outsidedly guided towards because that's what they think will, you know, give them a fulfilled life. And they're rushing towards, you know, marriage with a guy that chances are you're probably only going to be with them for 20 years. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, because it's great experience and I'm sure that you love that person, but like, why are you rushing into these relationships when you know that you can get better? And why are you rushing into these full-time jobs when you know that you can do better? Or why are you headed towards a life of money and riches and everyday work if you would rather chill out in a fucking cabin all day and like smoke flower and like paint and like watch the sunsets and the sunrise and cook and play with your 12 cats? You know, why I think, I truthfully, now that I'm talking, I that it has to do with importance. What is important to you? You know, what is important to you? And you got me to draw this diagram when you were talking about the cell. And it's like a circle with little branches off with like outer circles. And it's, the question inside is, what do you want your life to make up? And if you have in those circles right now what your life is currently made up of, in those other circles, you will have, you know, what you kind of got to take a look at both of those and think, this is what my life currently is made up of, and this is what I truthfully want my life to be made up of. So it's like, it comes down to how you want your life to be lived. So that way you're not on your deathbed and you're not thinking to yourself, I wish I did this, I wish I did that, which also comes down to the importance of what is actually important to you. Is it important enough or is it not? And if it's not, 86 it, toss it out.
That's funny. I didn't know the meaning of the term 86 until last year. So you have me beat by several years there with that knowledge. So
my dad's been saying it his whole life. So.
And for those listening who don't know, 86 means that you get kicked out of a bar. Am I correct?
I think that's what it is, but like other people use it for a term as like, just throw it out, like toss it out, like 86 it.
I see.
How's those mashed potatoes in the fridge? Oh, they're done. 86 them.
Toss it out. Yeah. So one phrase I wrote down was made up of. And I think that's an interesting, I mean, in the past episodes, we've kind of analyzed language here and there. And for some reason, it stands out to me, that phrase, made, like, what do you want your life made up of? I don't know why it just rings so strongly for me, but it does. And so that, wow, that's a very powerful question. And again, a lot of times the power in questions lies in the presupposition of the question. So the question, what do you want your life made up of, presupposes that you have the choice as to what is going to make up your life. So there's a presupposition of freedom, right? It's sort of like assumed just in the way that the question is phrased. And I think that is the right way to go about life. My existence first philosophy is an existentialist philosophy, and existentialism is a philosophy of freedom. It's about creating yourself through your free choices. And so I think it definitely kind of goes together with that. And for some reason, what do you want your life made up of? it feels good as a question. It makes me feel like optimistic towards the future. What do I want my life made up of? And I think here a sort of a hidden lesson in this and what we're doing is that this is a lesson in managing the mind and understanding the mind, because what we're doing right now is we're looking at ways to ask questions. And the way you direct your mind is you ask the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you guide it. That's like, using the reins on a horse or whatever to control it. I feel like one of the ways you control your own mind is you ask the right questions. Now, just go through one day and notice all of the questions that people ask themselves, out loud, right? People are always asking questions in their head, but also people ask questions out loud. Rhetorical questions, they'll ask a question like, why does this always happen to me? Or, why is there so much traffic today? And those questions are not simply questions of looking for facts. Those questions have a significant emotional component. They have a vibration to them. And when people ask those questions, it changes their frequency. And they don't realize that language is a tool, right? So language is a tool that when you put the words together a certain way, and just how I'm observing, like how this one question makes me feel, you put the words together a certain way, it has a certain ring to it, and that affects your whole being. And so there's this chain of interconnectedness between, the thoughts you have, the words you speak, how those words make you then feel, and then what you do based on those feelings. So there's this whole interconnected chain, I think. And that's sort of, I don't know, like maybe that's a little bit of a side note on language. But the other question you asked was what's important to you? So what do you want your life made up of, and what's important to you? And yeah, I think those questions are not asked as much as they should be. Because if they were, I think people would be acting very differently than they are. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. And it's funny that you said that, what is your life, like, what do you want your life to be made up of? That hit me as well when I wrote it down, because what I have here is, what do you want your life to make up? And have you ever heard that thing where like you're making up a story in your head anyways, so you might as well create one that benefits you?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so what do you want your life to make up? What do you want your life to make up? Like there's different context in the question, because it's like, what do you want your life to make up? What is your mind making up? What is your life making up? So what do you want your life to make up? Guide it. And that was sort of like another side thing on language. But I think that language could have a lot to do here with, making sure that once you're on your deathbed, you're like, I've lived a very fulfilled life, and I'm so happy with every contribution that I made to not only myself and my evolution, but the world. And I think that, like you said, questions, like, it's a proven fact that like our mind asks questions, and then our mind goes on like a rampage to find the answers. So if you're asking, why is there so much traffic today, bro, there is no logical reason for that. Like, there is no logical reason. It's, I don't know, there's a lot of people on the road today. It's nothing that you can do about it. It's, don't take it personally. Don't take it personally, it's just traffic. So what are some questions that we can ask ourselves while we're alive to ensure that once we're on our deathbed, we are, fulfilled and happy. Let's ask questions, and this ties in with the language, because once you really tango with wordplay, you really understand the way that what is your life made up of triggered you, and what do you want life to make up triggered me. It's, if you actually kind of notice how these words go together in a sentence, they spark a different frequency and a different vibration. So, questions to ask yourself when you're alive, what do I want to say while I'm on my deathbed? What do I want to think while I'm on my deathbed? What do I want to have accomplished when I'm on my deathbed? Who do I want to have helped on my deathbed? These are just really good questions to ask, because truthfully, it's great to live in the present moment. It certainly is, but we also have to think about our futures and make sure that we're not just wasting our God-given gifts. And honestly, I think that might be one of the things that, hurts people so much when they're on their deathbed, is that there's a certain deeper subconscious knowing inbuilt in us. I don't know if that's a word, built in us, that sort of, raises the question, did I, it's like, to quote you, begging the question, did I use my gifts that God gave me? Did I fulfill everything that I could have with the natural talents, gifts, love, vision that God gave me? And I think that's probably what hurts people the most. And so I think that we just need to start asking more questions that can benefit us on our deathbed, rather than, I guess, not benefit us on our deathbed. Like the questions of why, because the question of why, I learned a few years ago, like, why is not, it's not something to ask. You need to ask what is making me so mad about the traffic today? What is it that makes me so happy about the sky being blue? Ask what instead of why, and you're going to come up with something physical instead of energetic. So I think that'll help with people on their deathbed.
What was that? Lasso?
That's me pinging it back to you.
Oh, like a ping pong ball. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of ironic that, I like the smoke. It's got a good effect. I think it's kind of ironic that it's almost like, in order for us to make the most of our life, or kind of be the most alive, we need to always keep in the back of our mind the concept of death, or at least to remember it. And there's some really cool wordplay with the word deadline. If you think about, you have a project that needs to be done by a certain date, and that date is a deadline. Well, what does life and death have to do with it? Why do we call it deadline, right? Mm-hmm. And I gave a presentation one time at a big conference on self-help, and I made the point that the only real deadline is your corpse when you're about to get buried in the ground, because you're a line and you're dead, right? And that really should motivate people. The concept that you will die one day should not be seen as some sort of reason to get depressed and sit on the couch and do nothing. On the contrary, it should be seen as a reason to get up and live life, because you don't have forever. It's this false concept of the forever, and that bothers me. I hate it when people talk about and this gets into a little bit of religion, but when people talk so with such certainty about heaven or hell or whatever, but particularly heaven, that they're going to live forever, and this and that and whatever. So if that's true, then where's the sense of urgency to make something happen today and to enjoy life? Because it's those people that talk about living forever in heaven. Those are the people I do not see hustling and making the most of the life. That's sort of, almost opens a separate can, but let me get back to my main point, which is we need to keep this sense, the way you get a sense of urgency to get things done is by having a deadline, is by having some sense that your time is scarce. There needs to be a scarcity component there, right? Like if you were to get, if you or I were to get, 5 minutes with Grant Cardone, we would be like, okay, what am I going to ask him? Like, I have to, let me write down 100 things. I got to pick the best one. Like, we would go into overdrive. Why? Because scarcity. If you or I were told, okay, for the next 20 years, you get to be with Grant Cardone every day, I would be like, oh, that's dope. But like, whatever, I'll think of my questions later. I got 20 years to ask him, to ask him whatever, to learn from him, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And so it causes us to kind of behave differently. It causes us to not fulfill our potential as much. And that's very dangerous because I like the idea of fulfilling my potential, and I want all human beings to fulfill their potential. And if one frame of mind will cause people to not fulfill their potential versus cause people to fulfill their potential, then I think that frame of mind is very important. And that frame of mind is scarcity versus abundance. Now that's those words are very common, especially I think in like manifestation studies, right? Scarcity and abundance, but it depends on the example. In the example I'm using, I'm talking about time. There needs to be some sort of scarcity of time feeling so that you kind of get spurred into action. What do you think?
I completely agree. Completely agree. But I want to go back to what you said about the deadline because I really, really like that. And have you ever heard the saying that the reason why so it's like the reason why people don't succeed in their dreams or something is not because they're scared to live, but because they're scared to die. So one. Like I die all the time. I die. I'm not afraid to die. It's a little scary sometimes. I'm definitely in a process of dying right now. I'm dying. Old me is dying. I'm coming to a death point, and I'm evolving into a new human. And the words dead and line hit me because it's like, okay, if something is important to you, right? And you're like, okay, well, this is my deadline. I have to do this. And I think we call it a deadline, language play, because if you don't do this, it's your deadline. You're almost like dead inside. If you don't tackle that accomplishment by the time that you said that you would. So it's like, that's why they call it like a deadline, because you have this amount of time. And if you don't hit your deadline, you're kind of like, you're dead, you're done. And not dying as in like rebirthing, as in like I spoke about myself, but more of a different aspect of it. Like you're dead. You died because you didn't hit your deadline. And that's that line between life and death, that line between moving forward or halting. So deadline, it's really interesting. I love that wordplay. And then I also wanted to add some more wordplay in there because it's, okay, so I was thinking the other day and I was writing something down and I love paying attention to wordplay. I love it. I love the way that words make me feel when I put them in certain ways. So I was writing and it was like, so this way, right? So this way, it's you're not only showing them, like you're not only saying so this way, you're saying so this way, as in a whole nother path. And I think that's really interesting because it's like, talking to somebody who's like 40 years old or maybe 50 years old, and you're like, I'm gonna give you some questions to ask yourself right now, so this way you can fulfill your dreams and make sure that when you're on your deathbed, you're fulfilled. So this way, I'm guiding you this way, like, who would want to go a way of, I'm going to show you how to throw your life away and not do anything. So this way you can, be on your deathbed and be like, there's so much more that I could have accomplished. So I love like the whole wordplay, and I love the deadline, and I love the whole this way thing. And what was that last thing that you said? Because I think I wanted to go back to it. Do you remember?
Nope.
No. Darn. That's okay. But yeah, so
I guess just scarcity of time, scarcity.
Yes.
Abundance. Yeah.
Yes. So like the scarcity, that's right. So the scarcity of time that we have. I've also heard another saying, coming at you with the third saying today. There's a saying that says, we're also not scared of failing. We're not scared of failing. We got no fucking problem with failing. We are scared of winning. And when I say winning, I mean winning hard fucking core. We're scared of our light. We're scared of our beauty, everything that God gave us. We're scared to be all that we are to be. And I think that, throughout life, people are like, they kind of have like two ways to it. They're like, well, either I have so much time in life, I'm only 40, so they don't really nail things down to get it done. Because they think they have so much time, going back to the 20 years with Grant Cardone and 5 minutes with Grant Cardone. If we knew that we would die tomorrow, I'm sure that we would, really hustle up and do a lot of things that mean something to us. And so with scarcity, I had it. So with scarcity, they have that one option, and then they have the other option where they know that there's a scarcity of time, but they're scared to act on it because they're scared of their light. And once they're finally on their deathbed, they're either going to have, two separate thoughts. And that's the thought of, I wish I would have, taken the time. I wish I would have drilled into the scarcity of time that I actually have here on earth to do what I actually do and live a life of my actual desire. Or they're going to have a same thought, but similar result, like similar end thought. They're going to have a thought of, I knew how little time I had here on earth, but I was so scared to, produce my light, to shine my light. And in return, I don't have the life that I could have had because I never went for it because I was scared. So either I was too lazy or I was scared. Like ignorance almost, like knowing all the time that you have, but also knowing that it's kind of scarce. So those, I think, are like the two. I hope that made sense. That was definitely a very jumbled reply, but I hope it made sense.
Totally. Yeah, there's a lot of things that I have reactions to, so I want to discuss those, and then we'll have to wrap up for the day. But I think that there's a lot of very good lessons for people from this episode. Number one is to bring some awareness to exactly what role language can play in directing the mind. All right. It's not, people think about language as communication. It's like, oh, I say, this coffee cup is silver, so that you over there can also understand without looking at it that it's silver. And it's like, no, language is not just about communicating information. Language directs the mind. And by directing the mind, it not only influences our actions, but also our emotions. So that's one point. Then the other thing that you were getting at was this idea of being scared of winning. And that reminded me of that famous quote. I forget who it's attributed to, but the quote goes, something like our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our greatest fear is that we're powerful beyond measure. You've heard that one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's true. Now there's this interesting thing of regret. I think this is the way that the mechanics of regret work. This is my understanding. So the big element there is having uncertainty. So if you push forward into today and you start some things and you kind of, start to really express yourself, number one, there's a lot of uncertainty about how people are going to react to you, right? If you start being true to yourself, actually, this is what I want to do. I'm not going to do that. What so-and-so wants me to do, I'm going to do this. There's uncertainty as to how people will react to you. There's also uncertainty as to whether you'll be successful or not. You could start a business and it could fail, right? And you don't know if it's going to succeed or not. Now, the thing about regret is, so there's this sense of lack of safety, right? Because you're pulling away from some sort of dock of comfort. So you kind of go into the water, so to speak, and you're kind of out there and you don't know what's going to happen. You could easily make it to some sort of shore on the other side, and once you do, now you've arrived, you've crossed that harbor or whatever, that lake, you've arrived to the other shore, and all of a sudden now on the deathbed, that's the time where it's very easy to look back and say, oh, I could have done that. I should have done that, right? Because you've arrived to that place of safety. But when you're in the middle of the harbor, floating on some raft, you are in no man's land. And that triggers our insecurities. When our insecurities are triggered, then we decrease our action taking. So all of a sudden we're like, oh, well, maybe I should play it safe. Maybe I shouldn't start that business. What if it fails? Blah, blah, blah. All this negative talk. And I see that as a result of being somewhat in the middle. Now, I'm also going to tie this into something we said in previous episodes, which was this initial trauma of departing from the mother and having the umbilical cord cut. To me, that's separating, right, from a very safe source of comfort and life, separating, going on your own, going independent. There's a lot of risk involved. There's a lot of uncertainty involved, right? You got to start breathing on your own. What if something goes wrong? What if you don't make it, right? There's a lot of uncertainty there. But you kind of have to accept that. You kind of have to, there's a great story of Tony Robbins when he was just starting up and he ran a seminar in Canada. Well, the Canadian law enforcement showed up and they said, Mr. Robbins, you don't have a permit to do business in our country. And he had about 5,000 people showing up later that day to his seminar. And he told his assistants, all right, we're going to still hold the seminar. How far is it to the US border? All right, we're going to get me 5 Greyhound buses. We're going to bus everybody to like right across the border and we're going to hold this seminar. And I thought like, wow, that's amazing. Like most people would just say, all right, sorry, folks, it's canceled today. They shut me down. But, Tony Robbins is Tony Robbins. And he was like, I don't know how we're going to make this happen, but we're going to make this happen. Total uncertainty, but he was okay with the uncertainty. And Tony on his deathbed is not going to have that regret of, man, I wish I hadn't just canceled that seminar. I wish I had found a way to kind of get people, in the room and hold the seminar. He won't have that regret because he pushed forward into uncertainty and he just made things happen. So I think that's the formula. What do you think?
I love that so much. I think that the best part of everything you just said. Well, there was another good part too, but I think that the best part was that he's not going to have that regret. And I love that, because like sometimes you just gotta fucking push through it. Sometimes you just gotta come up with that creativity and just be like, fuck it, man. I'm just gonna do whatever it fucking takes, because, you know, this is what I want. And so that way you won't have that regret, and you will be fulfilled on your deathbed. And I also like when you said, you know, we're in foreign land, and, you know, separating from the mother. It's almost like we go through different mothers. And I've actually heard this in like a few spiritual books that I've read and a few Instagram accounts. You have different mothers throughout your life. And what if every time you get to a new place of mental evolution, that's the mother? And you have to venture off from your familiar mother and go off into that unknown territory and take everything that that familiar mother taught you and go out there with confidence. So I like that. I like that as well. I truthfully think that, you know, we should all just take a bunch of fucking risks and, you know, just go for it, and definitely do that diagram. You know, what your life is making up now and what you want your life to make up, almost as if it's a story. What story are you telling? What do you want your story to tell? Make it up yourself. So that way, when you're on your deathbed, you can be like, fuck yeah, I'm a fucking king. I did everything that I wanted to do.
That's right. Powerful words. And I love that analogy that we go through these various mothers in a metaphorical sense of, you know, we get comfortable doing something new, and then we have to, if we want to evolve to another stage, we need to, you know, cut that umbilical cord once again, move on our own, forge into the uncertainty. So wow.
Thank you.
Deep quality stuff. And yeah, pleasure as always. Any final words? We're now on Wednesdays, by the way, for if people have noticed, but so we'll be posting these typically on Wednesdays, Wednesday late evenings, but it may differ a little bit. Any final words?
Yes, thank you so much for listening. You all are the reason that you know, our podcast is here. You know, we wouldn't be doing this podcast if we didn't want anyone to listen and learn from it. So thank you so much for listening. You guys fucking rock.
Awesome. See you guys next week.